There we go. Good morning, everyone. We were stuck at 4 for a little bit. I was wondering what was happening.
Yeah,
Making
maybe
sure there
we
weren't
were
any
having a
connections.
technology issue again. Hello, everybody. Bye. See ya. Oh, Emma's in our chat. Good morning. You know, isn't it just a wonderful morning when we see Emma? When she was on vacation and we didn't get the good morning ladies from Emma, I felt lost. Hello to all our frequent flyers. So happy to have you here. And our new people, welcome, welcome.
We missed you too, Emma. Good morning, everyone. Wow, the numbers are continuing to climb. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as I give a quick intro, and then we'll dive into the show. How about that, Lori?
That sounds like a good plan because we got lots to discuss today. It's going to be a fun one. Let's just say that.
I'm definitely excited. So here we go. Good morning, everyone. To those of you who are new with us, my name is Lauren Simpson. I'm with the SBDC, or the Small Business Development Center. We are a national program with over 1,000 locations throughout the country, and we offer no-cost services to local small businesses. And our services are at no cost to you because your tax dollars have already taken care of our fees. So be sure you take part in our resources. For the Los Angeles network, you can see our locations represented on the map in front of you. We cover the Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. And again, these are our centers. So if you're anywhere in those counties, be sure to reach out so that we can offer you some help. Here's a deeper dive into what it is that we do. We offer no-cost business advising, and so you're able to sit one-on-one via Zoom currently with one of our business experts. We call them business advisors. You have the chance to meet with the guru of all numbers, Miss Lori Williams, as well as a few of her colleagues. And so we have experts in marketing, as well as business planning, licensing and permitting. You name it, we've got it, regardless of what industry you're in. And then we also offer virtual trainings, much like the training you have joined today. So as you can see on the screen, we're here to help. Be sure to get in contact with us so that we can assist you along your entrepreneurial journeys. You can contact us at 866-588-7232, 866-588-7232, or you can go online, smallbizla.org/new client. If you have joined us outside of our network, then you can go to americassbdc.org/find your SBDC. With that, I am going to stop my screen share. Lori, quick housekeeping. I want to be sure that any questions go into our Q&A. So let's put all questions into the Q&A to be sure that Lori's able to see them. And then for our chat, it'll be reserved for any information, any contact links, anything that Lori would like to share with you. And I think that's it for me, Lori. I'm going to kick it over to you now. I'm excited about today.
I know today is going to be a lot of fun. Not all of them are fun, okay? So I don't want to emphasize all of our shows are fun. But I wanted to do a quick on the upcoming guests. So next week, we're going to have Ariel back. He's a favorite, been on the show before. We're going to talk about how to increase sales and marketing strategies. I figured, you know what? It's the summer low. It's August. It's time to kind of get our hands around a good sales and marketing strategy. So that was a good time to bring that. Then Randy, this is going to be so exciting, Lauren. This is a frequent flyer. She's going to come on and talk about how she reached out to me and said, I need help with my numbers. We've gone through Excel doc after Excel doc. She's going to tell her story. So that's pretty cool. Then we got LaRuth Wright. She has her company is a full service funeral service business. And we're going to learn how you can actually create strategic partners and create a full service funeral service business, and how she came about doing that. And then we got our favorite Deborah Darris back, but we're not going to talk about social media. We're actually going to talk about the mindset for a successful business. So we got a lot of really cool things coming up. So with no further ado, I want to talk about today, Lauren. You know, what we hear from entrepreneurs quite a bit, you know, if you ask an entrepreneur, what is their ultimate dream? They say their ultimate dream is to create a company that follows their passion. You know, that's all we ever read about. You know, it started with Who Moved My Cheese? You know, how can we follow our passion? And for many people, the ultimate dream is to not only follow their passion, but to involve their family. Think about Sylvia with the restaurant and all the people that we've had. And remember when Sylvia was on, people were saying, I'd love to have my family involved in my company, right? So those are the two aspects that people really just say, if that would happen, that would be the best. Well, guess what, Lauren? Our next guest achieved both, which is pretty remarkable. So Rebecca is the COO of Tiny Topanga. Tiny Topanga is a full-service tiny home and van conversion, design, and build company. She's going to share with us how her and her husband, Israel, began their entrepreneurial venture. But before we go, hey, Lauren, can you show us a quick video and give us a feel? Here we go, guys. Okay, guys, now how much fun was that? Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Rebecca, it is so much fun to have you there. Now, there's so many fun aspects that we can discuss. I mean, we can go at this from so many different angles. So I think we need to start from the beginning. What events in your life led to you creating Tiny Topanga?
Sure. Well, since we're all in, around, and from LA, I think we can all agree that housing rates and rent is just insane. And that's sort of how we started years ago. I think it was 2015, 2016. My husband and I were living with family and we're looking at moving out, and it was really, he was very anti-rent. He wanted to save money so we could buy something. And one day I found tiny homes online and I came home and I was like, why don't we do this? Like, showed him videos of tiny houses. And he was like, as he is, we're both very entrepreneurial. He was like, yeah, I can build you one and we can turn it into a business. So he had, that's sort of how all of our conversations go, you know, like any little thing. Oh, wouldn't this be fun? Yeah. And we can turn it into a business. So he had some experience in construction, and his family, his father ran a towing business for a long time. And so they're just very like hardworking, you know, a hardworking family with a lot of different skill sets, like being able to transport tiny houses. Like we have a built-in, like, you know, towing company. And Israel, my husband, had experience in construction and laying floors in building. And it was something that interested him. Neither one of us went to school for this. He studied international relations. I studied social entrepreneurship and hospitality, but it was just something that like you mentioned in your intro, something that we were really interested in and passionate about. And so we started, you know, looking at the video that you showed was actually the tiny house that we designed for ourselves. So we didn't design it for anybody else in mind other than a newlywed couple who both work at home. And we ended up selling that. Like now it's been the ongoing joke. Every tiny house we create for ourselves, we've ended up selling. So we still have yet to build our own tiny house. But that's sort of how we got started. So it was many years of research. We got the trailer, we started building. It took several years to build the first one. And then once we sold the first one, it's just been kind of, you know, perfecting our systems and turning it into a real business.
Got it. Well, you know, first of all, that's hilarious that every time you build one for yourself, you sell it. I have had other entrepreneurs say that, you know, every time we build something, you know, my husband wants to sell it, but it's usually not your actual home. So that makes that even more funny. I have to say, I laughed at that. You know, Rebecca, what strikes me is independent of whether you're talking about a tiny house, a product or a service, so many companies really involved a word, and this is interesting, a word that people don't talk about. And I believe that the word I'm about to mention is one of the most foundational aspects of business success. Here's the word: processes. So as we talk about processes, let's first talk about the production. I'm sure you didn't just take a trailer and just start building away. There was something you had to do from a production standpoint to even get started. I mean, my mind just goes through from where do you build it? How do you build it? You know, who comes into play? And the other thing I know personally about like van conversions and tiny homes, although you are doing the custom work for the construction, you're involving a lot of people's manufactured products, from the heater to the air conditioning, etc. So talk to us about how you started out with processes and what you learned along the way. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head with so many of the things you just said. And one thing that I've been saying a lot recently is people think it's a tiny house, but it is not a tiny project. There's a lot of process that goes into it. And to add one more layer of complexity, something I didn't mention, we build our tiny houses in Mexico, in central Mexico. So, and then we import them into the United States. So that adds one more layer of complexity with the import process and transportation process and everything like that. So I can say, like, from starting the first one, I wouldn't necessarily say that we had or even knew a process. Like the first one was really so much like any prototype starts, it's just an experiment. It's like you learn things as you go. Like we knew, like a foundation of the house, we knew a tiny house needs to start with a trailer. So, you know, doing research on the best manufacturers, interviewing them, going to see their plants and everything. We found one that works and we're still working with them. That's the first thing. And then just all the little things, like you said, there's so many things that go into a tiny house, and you think about the finished product and you're like sometimes we get fixated on things because of the way that we want it to look. And so I remember this being a thing, like, well, Israel really wanted the outside to look a certain way. So that was something that he really wanted to research at the beginning, but then we had to go back and be like, okay, hold on, there's a lot that needs to happen before we put siding on the outside of the house. Like we have to put, we have to do the flooring, we have to put insulation in the trailer, we have to do all the utilities, the wiring, the electrical. And so like little by little, we kind of would take one step forward and one step back and realize, okay, we needed to do this before this. I think we more or less got it okay the first time, but we did learn a lot from that process. So now, like you said, we have a supplier for where we get the mini split. We have a supplier for, for the trailer, for the flooring, for every little thing. We also, because we build in Mexico, one of the things we like to do is incorporate artisan work into what we do. And so we even have a supplier for like the handmade and hand painted tiles and the hand forged copper lamps. So even things like that are not manufactured, they're like handmade, we have the supplier for. So I don't know if that really answered the question. It's sort of the first time was an experiment.
It does, and Rebecca, it's perfect because when I was really excited to have you on the show and had been meaning to reach out to you for a while to bring you on, and I knew the guests would love to hear about tiny homes because it's the in thing, right? But I also knew that I could get people to listen and understand detail and processes, because what you said, you hit the nail on the head. When you first start, it's really an experiment. And then what you have to do is to recognize that you have to get processes in place, because what I have noticed, having 30 some years of consulting, is that a lot of times when companies don't engage in processes at the once they learn they have to, you don't know at first what you don't know. But eventually you got to stand back and go, we need to have systems, because otherwise they grow, and then the lack of systems often cause them to backtrack because things go bad. Then they don't have the internal quality, whatever. And I've seen people miss out on opportunity for growth because they didn't have the infrastructure, if I just call that, including the processes in place. So I take any opportunity I can to get people to listen to the importance of doing that. You know, it's funny, and I shared with you, not, you know, we'll go back to how we first met. I'll talk about that in a second through the SBDC, but I eventually did share with you that I've been living in my, you know, tiny home now. I don't usually talk about it, but I decided I would do it on the show. So it was 7 years ago, believe it or not, before it was cool, that I went to a van conversion company and said, I got this great idea. I want to live in a van. I want my whole professional life to come with me. And can this work? And I was scared to death. I thought it was the craziest thing. But one of the things that I thought was funny when you said it is I went in and I was like, oh, and I want this table and I want this and they want this. And they said, whoa, back up. We got to talk about the systems. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why the systems? And they're like, well, because until you choose the systems, you don't know the space you have available. So I had first this little drawing of all this space. I got the CAD drawing back with the systems and lost 3/4 of my space. I felt like, you know, it's like, oh, the ducks have to go here and this. And one of the things I know, 6 years living this way, tiny, minimalistic is simple and complicated. Everything takes twice the amount of time. I can't even go on Amazon and make a purchase until I think, well, where am I going to put it? Will it fit? So it is real complicated in that. So I just had to say those comments, but you absolutely answered it. Now, what I find interesting, and you brought it up, is, and that's what I was going to speak to, the fact that you are producing in Mexico. In addition, there is all this, which once again, I know because I live the lifestyle, government regulation, anything from the wiring down to hazardous waste and stuff like this. There's a lot. And you know, Rebecca, I have a lot of our clients just get engaged in one little government rule, a permit, a business permit, and it scares them, and it's complicated. So, you know, I would like to talk about all of the government regulations, and I have to believe you were not aware of them. So you had to have a mindset of approaching these without getting scared and just digging into them and understanding them. Can you speak to that area of the business and what you had to do to evolve to where you are today?
Yeah, I think it's what we had to do and also what we continue to do on a regular basis, because tiny houses are an up and coming thing. There's no federal law for them. There's not even in most states real laws for them. So we have to get down to every client that we have where they're going to be putting it. You know, like we could very well have a conversation with a client and be like, it's your problem, figure it out. But we just don't like to do that. Like, we don't want to deliver a tiny house and then they're going to have to sell it in a month, you know? So we get down to the very, very city. We're on phone calls with city planning, county planning departments to make sure, like, what has to go in this tiny house for it to be legal? Is it even legal? Like, we've had to say no to clients, like, sorry, we can't build you a tiny house because you just can't put a tiny house where you want to. So yeah, I think having that, like, to answer your initial question, I think having that mindset of, like, it's even like the tiny house. It's like, you don't, maybe if you knew years later down the road, everything you had to do to get started, maybe you wouldn't do it, but it's just going for it, right? Like, it's just getting the trailer, starting to lay the floor. It's the same thing with the government regulations. It's like, okay, asking the right questions, like reaching out to the SBDC. Like, you know, you were a big help when we got started, when we actually incorporated the company, asking the right people, having the right people in your network, or finding the right people, and just not, like you said it right. I think a lot of people just get scared, and not even scared, but overwhelmed. Like, it's just a lot of work. It's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of studying. But, like, at the end of the day, a lot of times there is an answer. There's a, you do this, you get this. And so I find a little bit of satisfaction in that, with the government, the governmental stuff that we have to do to actually get the tiny house to the States. There's the Mexican side of it. There's a United States side of it. And we have done a ton of research, we've read a lot, but we've also been really lucky. Maybe it's luck and maybe it's just like being diligent about finding the right people, of finding really good partners that they're experts in that area. Like they're experts in export and import and can help us, you know, fill in the blanks where we don't really know. In addition to all the research we've done, it has really, really helped to work with experts in their areas.
Absolutely. And you know what you brought up from a tiny home perspective, a lot of people don't realize that there are a lot of laws around tiny homes. I always say, yes, tiny homes are awesome, but you got to figure out where you're going to place it. I'm rolling stock, so to speak, so I don't have that. But I had looked into sometimes saying, well, I'm just going to get a piece of property and that would be kind of fun. If I called this my summer home and rolled into it for the summer. There's so many rules within the place. You can do this, but only 3 months, and you can only do that. So there's a lot of rules. And I think what you said about you don't know it, but just digging into it, this is an old expression. I'm showing my age. Younger people don't use it, but there was always a statement of, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? I don't know if you ever even heard that. That's like an old saying, but I use it quite a bit. And I, deal with the government and legal and finance and tax, but even sometimes like I'll read, I'll go to the government website, I'll read a paragraph and I'm like, oh, well, you got to back up. You just got to read each word. And then, like you said, partners. And I always realize that all I got to do is talk to about 4 more people and they're going to give me the clues. And it's fun because then you piece the clues together and you start to understand. So it's really, and I love what you said. I'm just kind of summarizing it in my own words. It's a matter of not being afraid and getting curious about it, because what I find is when people get afraid, they shut down and then they don't even engage with the words. And also, Rebecca, if we could just add one little aspect and tell me your thoughts on this. I am always telling people, go straight to the government, go to the government web pages, call the government. Don't Google and read somebody's blog, because it may not be and probably will not be correct. And have you seen that as well?
Well, and a lot of times it might not be correct and they'll charge you for their advice a lot of times. So actually, this is really funny because we're in something like this right now with the import and export, and Israel was doing all this research on one part of it. And he found this consultant and they were going to charge him, whatever, $200 an hour. And he was like, this is stupid. I'm just going to call the government. And he did. Like, he called like the Mexican version of the IRS and they gave him all the answers that he needed. And sometimes you have to wait a long time and you have to be on the phone and ask, well, that's not really what I needed. Can you pass me to somebody else? Like, you have to go through that a little bit. But really, like, I think you're absolutely right. Like, the government wants you to follow the laws and they want you to do it right. I've actually been very surprised. This goes back to like where you can place a tiny house. A lot of the times there's blogs, like you said, and third-party things you can find. Realtors sometimes will talk about it, insurance, like all these people that want to have a say in the tiny house world, right? But if I just call city planning, I've been so surprised at how helpful these people are. Because I always go into it like, I start out, now I've learned, but I used to start out with the mindset of like, they're going to say no, they're going to put all this red tape, they're not going to help me. But so many times, like, people want to find solutions for their communities. Tiny houses are a really good solution for a lot of people. And so, like, I've been really, really impressed with just how helpful governmental agencies can be. And sometimes the answer is no, but they'll be creative about like, this is what you can do to make it work. Or, they'll even tell you like secrets, like this code is about to come out, or like, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but so definitely, I think that's a really good point. And I want to go back to one other thing that you said. You mentioned the word fun, which is really funny to me because none of this sounds fun, right? It does not sound fun to like read regulations and be on the phone for hours. But what's really funny, like last week or the week before, as we're doing all this stuff, Israel was researching all this and he was like, I should have been a lawyer. I love this. Like, he just got so into it. And I had the exact same, because we work on different sides of the business and I handle a lot of the client relations. And so I'm the one that on the phone with city planning. And I had the same thing yesterday. I'm like, I really love this. People will send me the parcel number and they'll like, can you just check? And I'm like, I do all this digging into it. And it does, because it does become fun. It's like a puzzle. Like you said, you get to find all these little pieces that start connecting, and I don't know. it takes something that seems very overwhelming to be
I
fun.
agree. And what I love what we're talking about is it doesn't matter whether you're a product or a service. If you're in business, even with a business license, you have to deal with government regulations. And I have too many people on the phone every day that aren't even addressing it and don't even think to call. And when we think government, we think a big federal government, but what we're talking about is the local. And I love what you said, Rebecca. They do want to find solutions. Like I said, I've been looking at possibly purchasing a small parcel in different states here and there, and I would call up the planning. And one of them was like, well, you can't do it, but if you buy 10 acres, you can. They give you information such as that,
Right.
but watch for this and watch for that. So I completely agree with what you're saying on that. Now, one of the things you mentioned about my helping you, and let's go back to that because I thought it was kind of interesting. And I may not totally remember the whole story, Rebecca. So if I did something wrong, you correct me. But from my memory, I remember Don at the Pasadena SBDC. Shout out to my Pasadena SBDC friends there. He said, "Hey, can you make some time to talk to Rebecca quickly? My calendar's hard to get on." He was like, "She really needs your help." And if I recall correctly, you were getting ready to present in a trade show, and you were not incorporated, and thought, well, possibly I should be, and so you needed help getting through that process of being incorporated, and then that's how we first talked. And what I'd like to add to our conversation, and I'm kind of Rebecca adding to an upcoming show I'm going to be speaking of. So often, guys in the audience and people that talk with me hear me say people are incorporating, and they're incorporating just ideas. They're incorporating way too fast. I'm constantly unraveling issues people get into. In fact, we got two upcoming guests, and one of them's going to talk about when she incorporated real fast, believing something that wasn't true. But in your case, Rebecca, I saw the risk, I saw the liabilities, and we walked through the incorporation. And if I remember correctly, it was the first showing of your tiny house. So I think we got a conversation about legal, incorporation, and marketing, and a congratulations on your trade show. So take it from there. That's my memory, Rebecca. You tell me what you remember.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think it just goes back to like even your question on systems. Like sometimes you just have to start. And I think we did not incorporate too early because we didn't know what we were going to do. So we didn't get into any real issues with how we went about it. And I think we got to a point where, okay, like this is a business now. We're trying to sell this tiny house. This is not like we built it for ourselves, but now we're trying to sell it. We're trying to have a brand name for ourselves. So we did a lot of like the prototyping, that this is who we are. And we got to a point where like, okay, this is legit. This is not playtime anymore. Like we have to make this a real business. And so, yeah. And you kind of walked me through, like, I think a lot of those things we kind of knew, but we were like, do we really have to do this now? Can we wait on this? Like, who really cares? And so you helped us through that process of like, no, and you're right. Like there is, especially it's a house, we're going to be at a trade show. There were, this was last May. So now I don't know the exact number, but over the course of 3 days, we easily had 2,000 or 3,000 people walk in and out of our tiny house. So it's not a small thing. I'm glad we were able to get everything, ready before we went. But yeah, I think like, kind of you mentioned people don't really know when. And I think I've done, because like I mentioned, my husband and I are both very entrepreneurial, and I've done like DBAs and LLCs before that I never turned into anything. Like it was kind of stupid to incorporate as early as I did. And so I do think like we were at the right point. I don't think we waited too long. I don't think we jumped on it too early. I think it was good to incorporate when we did, and we just incorporated as an LLC. And then all the other stuff that comes with going to a trade show. So that allowed us to, have a bank account set up in our business name and get insurance as a business and all the other things that, we're able to then fall in line because we were incorporated. So yeah, then we did take it to a trade show, which was good, just to kind of learn what people want in the tiny house world. And we didn't end up selling the tiny house at that show, but we created enough like followers and followings that we were able to sell it pretty soon after that. So
tell us about the first sale. What was that like? How did that come about? Because I knew you didn't sell it at the show, but it was down the road a bit. I remember either Don told me or somehow you told me because we talked, but I knew you finally sold the first one. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so I think the trade show was cool because it made us like, I feel like deadlines and to have something exhibited always like kind of put some fire under your butt to get things ready and perfected. And so it was good for us because the house was ready, but not like really ready to sell. And so that got us ready to show it. And then after that, we just looked at different markets on how to sell the tiny house. I was putting it on Facebook Marketplace and all these online like tiny home listings and things like that. And we just, after lots and lots of inquiries and FaceTimes, we finally found a couple, or they found us, that were like, this tiny house specifically checked all their boxes that they were looking for. Like it was just right for them. It was right for a couple. They needed a flush toilet. Like one thing that you get into with tiny houses is the utilities, like on grid, off grid. And so that house was it's an on grid house, like electrical stove, regular toilet. And so that was what they were looking for because they were going to be on a property in Colorado that required certain things. And so it was just kind of luck. They had been looking for a long time. We were trying to sell the house, so the timing just worked out. And then we drove it to Colorado and got it all installed for them. And we just had a conversation with them recently. So it's been about a year since they've been in their tiny house. They're still enjoying it. And yeah, it was like, it was bittersweet, right? Because that house was supposed to be for us, but they love it. It's perfect for them. And it got us really excited to keep going. That first, like, we haven't really had to put a lot of our own money into this company other than building the first tiny house, because we were able to sell it. And then that money we've been able to put into future projects. So it was awesome.
That's an interesting part where to go next, but I have to tell you, so I've been living in my van conversion for 6 years. I can still drive down the road, which I tow a Jeep, so I drive down the road and tow a Jeep, but I can still drive down the road, look at my cat and have tears roll down my eyes of happiness. People are like, are you ready to give it up? I'm like, oh no. I said the other day, I'm going to be like, I just listened to this country and Western song and he said he was going to drive it till the wheels fall off. And I said, that's going to be my van and me. When the wheels fall off, I'm done. But I never dreamed that I was going to love it like I do. Yeah. So I understand about the first year in and everything. But you know what, Rebecca, as you were speaking about the marketing, this is what struck me. And let's see if I can get the words out so you understand where I'm going. When you have a company, I always refer to it as gumball sales. It's an old expression, meaning if you sell things that are less expensive in a lot, or if you like a real estate, you got that one big house and you're waiting to get the commission, right? Obviously, when you sell gumballs, it's easier to keep cash flow and, it's not scary. But when you've got one thing that you're trying to sell, it's much more challenging. Your marketing has to be different. Your marketing has to be dead on, and you have to have a strategy. You just can't say, hey, do you want to buy a gumball? So what strikes me with tiny homes is another aspect that I'm going to envelope into that before I go to the question. And I'm using all these old-fashioned expressions. I don't know if they're used anymore. I'm showing my age, but we used to call them looky-loos, the people that would come in and look at your product and be interested and waste your time, talk to you about it for hours and hours, but never buy, right? Well, you've got the ultimate looky-loo. Who doesn't want to talk about their dream tiny house, but they may have no desire, no actual ability to do it, no actual going to move into a tiny house, but they love to chat about their dream. So between you having a opposite of a gumball sale, it's going to take a while to sell. It's got a customization. You've got to get the person who has the right property, the right situation. I would say that you've got almost a marketing nightmare on your hands in a way, right? So I have to believe, I don't care what the audience's company is that's in listening today, they have got an easier sell than you. Give us some marketing thoughts and advice, okay? How do you like that for a beginning question?
Everything you said is right. But it's funny, like, we sell tiny houses on Instagram. So it's also really funny. Like you take something that's so hard to sell and a big purchase item, and we're selling it like based on a few posts sometimes. I mean, it obviously is much more complicated than that, but sometimes that's how it feels, because sometimes the first time somebody saw us was on Instagram. And so it's really funny. But to your point about the looky-loos, yes, we recently partnered with a company in New Zealand to be able to build. She has like these famous designs for people in the tiny house world. Shay's Tiny Homes. If you know anything about tiny house, she has famous designs, and we're one of the only 2 companies in the US that can now make her tiny houses, build her tiny houses. And so since we started, like we already were getting quite a few calls, but since we started that partnership, I'm literally answering 10 emails a day. I'm on 2 or 3 phone calls a day. And a lot of them just are like looky-loos, like you said. And sometimes every once in a while, I do hit a wall where I'm like, yes, we can put a flush toilet in. Yes. Like it's the same answers and questions every single time. But most of the time I try and look at it from like, I try and remember myself when I was looking into the tiny houses and I didn't know anything, and I just try and have fun with it. Like, it is a big puzzle. There's a lot that people have to learn. And I've really started to enjoy that part of it, like really helping people learn. And even if they don't buy a tiny house with us, because, maybe 1 out of 30 conversations is actually going to turn into a sale or more. But I like that I can be a part of their tiny house journey, even if they buy from somebody else years down the road. Most of the conversations end with like, wow, I had no idea of all of this. So thank you so much for letting me know, and I just try and have fun with it, but, and knowing that like, this is probably not going to be a sale, going into it with like, this is just a conversation about a tiny house. And sometimes it is a sale. So I tried, that's kind of
your marketing budget, if you will, is you're speaking and you're entertaining. And,
It
I know what
is.
you mean about those common questions. I have a very unique van conversion. I push a button and it's a second floor, right? And that's where the bed is.
Cool.
So even when people drive into the RV parks where I hang out, everybody wants to know, and everybody wants to know it. And at one point, everybody comes up and asks all these questions, and I'm still living a very busy professional life, right? So I actually started doing handouts where I would just hand out, go to YouTube, watch the show, come back and ask, because I mean, constantly people at the door, and it is my home. To them it's like this cool thing, but I'm like, this is my home, guys, right? And so then after I would go, does it have a toilet? Does it have a shower? Does it have a stove? Does it have this? I got to the point where I go, it has everything my apartment had minus the hallways. It only has one. That's how I started it. Like, let's get that all out of the way, so we don't have to go through that. But I can only relate to all the questions. Really, a flush toilet? I had to laugh when you said that. Yeah, I have the same kind of toilet you have. Okay, same thing. It doesn't really matter on that. I'm going to walk back a little bit on 2 areas that I think is interesting that you can speak to. And you mentioned partnerships. Now, a lot of times what happens is people engage, and I think you're probably going to have had some stories on this, but they find a partner and they really like the person and they engage in the partnership for that reason only, not really saying, but can this person deliver what the company needs? Or, and even worse, the person could at the time because they didn't realize what they really needed, but that partnership is no longer working, but they don't want to end it because they're friends. So I find that a lot of the vulnerability in small companies is the partnerships they create or maintain and the crossing the line into emotions. I can tell already, Rebecca, you can run with this one. Chat on that with everybody.
Yeah, no, I think yes, you're absolutely right. And I think our personalities, Israel and mine, is that we're both very loyal to our partners. Like, we're loyal to, in the other businesses that we run in Tiny Topanga, like we just, a partnership is for us, it's like a lifetime thing, or as long as your business exists. And so I think you're absolutely right. We've had, luckily, we haven't run into any issues where we have to think about like parting ties, because we do a lot of, we're not like partnering with people just because they're friends or anything like that. Like, there's quite a bit of vetting that goes into it before we begin the partnership.
Hey, Lauren, can you get that? I got to stop. Lauren, put that in the chat.
Yeah.
Vetting before we begin the partnership. Throw that in the chat. That's the key word. Sorry, Rebecca. That was just such a gem. Keep going.
No, and it's like dating before you get married, right? Okay. Yeah. You have to do that kind of upfront work. And we do, I think like the kind of the examples that you've mentioned, like, started, but now they can't continue. Like we haven't really run into that. What we have run into is that we started with people when they were starting out and we were starting out, and now they're really busy. And so now we have to figure out like, okay, what does that mean for us? Because they're still producing quality work. We still work good together, but their timelines are getting longer and longer and longer. And so what does that mean for us? Does that mean that we now have to adapt to their timeline and like, we are going to have to build faster because we're waiting for this one piece? Or does it mean we're going to have to look for additional partners? And so we are sort of asking those questions, but you're right. Like that loyalty is definitely a huge piece of anything of why we would still be with this partner. And it's still quality work and they're still doing okay, but it is a question that we're asking for sure. And I think at the end of the day, like, they'll understand if we have to go somewhere else, because business is business. Like if they're too busy, they don't need us, so it's also not like we're not going to feel bad, and nobody's going to feel bad if we have to go somewhere else, because at the end of the day, like the client is the one who needs the product on time. We need to fulfill our promises, and they would understand that from a manufacturing perspective too, because we're the client.
I think by now the audience can see why I thought Tiny Homes was such a great interview, because you can see you've got the ultimate challenges in so many ways. It first sounds fun, and it is fun, but there are a lot of details. And when we speak about it, you're the ultimate customization of elaborate detail on a time frame. And what's happening, like I had mine built 7 years ago. It took an entire year, 6 months, because I had a special four-wheel drive van shipped from Germany, but it was 4 months for the production of this van. I spent 2 months going over the plans. I mean, it was involved. And they tell me now at the company I use that there is a 3-year wait because it's become so popular.
Oh, wow.
And so you've got the ultimate turnaround detail, and the people that do the custom work, if they're busy. And so this brings to another aspect. And Rebecca, this is one that I have to believe that you come up against, and this is something that I see even service businesses suffer. So let me see if I can get the question correct. It has to do with when you bid an original order and people make changes along the way, and they don't expect the bill to increase, or they come back later and want warranty work after warranty after warranty work. I talk a lot with clients about how you also have to have processes that involve when a change order is, how change orders work, and when it's no longer warranty. I see this mostly abused with people who have service businesses where they're selling their own services. They give an hourly rate, and by the time they've given so much away because they're not tracking their time, they're at like $8 an hour, right? So this, what you say, is really probably another crucial component of your company structure, but great wisdom to anybody on this show. Take it from there.
Yeah, I will say, so before starting Tiny Topanga, I also run a marketing agency. So it's what you're talking about is much harder for the marketing agency, because we'll give a quote and we will let ourselves get taken advantage of because you just forget to track time. And we usually don't say, oh, I did this much extra work and I'm going to bill you for it. So we try and be upfront about that in in contracts, and be very clear with our retainer prices and stuff like that in the agency, but it is hard. With Tiny Topanga, all of that is sort of in the contract. For change orders and things like that in the build, we basically give 2 months of design process, and they'll see a 3D render before we start building. And so that's where we're pretty clear about like everything you need to change structurally needs to happen now. Once you put your stamp of approval on the design, like that's it. And we will say, we'll leave a little bit of like, gray area for, we'll send you pictures throughout the build of different, paint swatches and different tiles. So you'll get a say as we build. But as far as any major structural changes, that needs to be approved in the architect and design portion, which we give 2 months for. After the build, after delivery, we keep changing the timing on our warranty because we're still kind of feeling the market and what is needed for that. But we usually give a year on anything in the tiny house if it goes wrong because of something, other than what, like outside of the client's control. But yeah, I think a lot of that is just being really upfront about it. It's all in the contract that they sign at the beginning, and being very clear, even when I have my first intake call or discovery call with clients, being very clear about the process and the expectations and like one of the things that I've learned is like, we're the ones, creating the product or delivering the service, but it is a relationship. Like we also need something from the clients. And so not to like take full 100% responsibility. And so what that means is if we need something from the client for us to be able to do a good job, we're going to have to be asking them about that. Like, okay, well, you didn't tell us this. So how would we know, kind of being like over communicating. If we're confused about something, oh, I thought you wanted this green and not that blue, like asking before we make any big decisions. So I don't know. I kind of like went off on a tangent with that.
No, that was perfect. And I think, Lauren, if you can throw something in the chat, I think the key words that I picked up on what you were saying, Rebecca, that I tell people is being very clear, communicating up front, having it in writing. It's the clarity. And so what it takes is first, you have to be clear about what the rules are internally before you can communicate them externally. So once again, we're going back to processes, and you don't have to laugh, Rebecca, because we're going down memory lane. And as we're talking, you were talking about, planning things ahead. I have a ton of outlets because I knew the cost of putting in an outlet later was going to be so much. So I got all these outlets, right? And I lived for the CAD drawings, and the CAD drawings would tell me. But when you talk about needing information from the client, you don't have any idea how many decisions. I didn't realize how many decisions I had to make. And so there was this day where I had to go to the production facility to do walkthroughs and make some more decisions. And we started at the beginning of the factory, and it was asking different questions about different things that I wanted. And there was this couple there that was arguing over what color the tile should be. I went through the factory. It took me an hour. I made probably, I swear I made like 300 decisions. I came back. They were still arguing about the color of the tile. And the guy said to me, we love working with you because you're just like this, and this. But what was so fascinating, because when I finally came to the tile, I was like, I don't care right now, but I'll tell you what, give me a day because I'll care tomorrow. I'm just exhausted because you just don't realize the amount of decisions. And then, I always called mine my little spaceship because I had so many cool remote things on it, but the van will talk to you. It'll do all this stuff. My first year, it scared me to death. Alarms would go off. I wouldn't know why. I have this special remote control on my van and all this. And one day I tripped the alarm and my phone was yelling at me and my computer was yelling at me and the van was yelling at me. I mean, it was just crazy. But I can't help it. It's going down memory lane. Now it's like I'm an old pro of living this lifestyle. But I think it's so true on what you were saying is the details and stuff. So as we got some questions, but before we go there, tell us about what you envision the future. Where are you going to, marketing to what you're planning on doing and where you want to go, just anything that you envision. And then I'm going to throw one more into you, Rebecca, you're envisioning and any thoughts that you want to leave the audience as they can take, these are the takeaways.
Yeah. So I think my vision in the next maybe 5 to 10 years would be, we have our base in Mexico. We have like our shop. We have all of our production is here. I would like to have another site. We're sort of looking at Texas, just logistically from where we are in Mexico, it makes sense. I would like to have another site because there are certain builds that we can't do in Mexico just because of the permitting and transport and everything. So that's like one thing I have on our future goals. And I also think just like more of the systems, like we're getting into this place where we've built a few custom tiny houses, but just because of more interest in what we do and this partnership, like we are getting to a place where we're going to be building several houses at a time. And so just internally, our operations, I would like to just get even better at our systems and our, all our manufacturing partners and everything. Just kind of, I'm reading right now the Toyota way. And so I'm learning a lot about systems, and it's really interesting to me. And I think there's just like with little tweaks that we can make, I think we can do a much better job, and everybody on the team can be happier. So those are sort of the things that I'm thinking about right now. And eventually hopefully we can have our own tiny house. That's also part of the dream, and our own van. Because we're by, like, we go back and forth between Mexico and Southern California. We want to have like a tiny house in each place and then a van to travel back and forth. So that's like the personal dream. Yeah. And yeah, I would say like any like kind of words of wisdom for small businesses. And I think tiny houses do paint this picture well, but I would just say, just take a step. Like, don't be overwhelmed by how big the project feels or all of the unknowns, like, or how scary it might be to figure out all the governmental stuff or whatever it is, whatever the product or service is. Like, just take the step, and then you'll take another step, and then you'll take another step. Like, just start moving, and not think too much about it.
That's beautiful words. Now we got a couple questions, but I want to say that's before I finish that's beautiful words of encouragement. That they are very logical, very intelligent, very educated, and inspirational. Beautiful words. So we got a couple questions here, Rebecca, and one of them really good question by Charles. He says, "What are some of the questions that you use for vetting partners that you?" And he thanks you for the presentation, but he's just wondering, is there any specific questions that you would use that he could also understand? Rebecca, are you there? Lauren, are you there?
I'm here. She may have lost.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm turning my camera off for a minute because I am here.
No worries, no worries. Go ahead, Rebecca. I didn't know if it was on my end, so go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my internet got a little slow, so I just turned the camera off for a minute. But thank you, Charles, for the question. Thank you for being here. I think the questions are really gonna vary for whatever partner you're looking for. So when we talk about partners, we're talking about a lot of manufacturing things, like where we get certain materials, where we get certain parts for the tiny house. That's what we're talking about in partners. So some of the questions that we ask are like what they are able, first of all, like if they can meet our needs. Like, we'll have a specific need. We'll go with the trailer for an example. Can you build us a custom trailer? Okay, great. How do you build? How long does it take? What are the materials that you use? Can you meet our demand? For things as big as that, like if we don't have a good trailer, we can't build a tiny house. Like, we went to their site. So it really depends on the partner, but I would just, some like historical questions too. How long have you been doing this? Which in our case, we don't really use that against people because we're sort of new at this too. So we're not expecting people to have 20 or 30 years of history when we don't either. But just, I think a lot of those initial calls, you can really just kind of get a feel too for how sincere and genuine people are, and also asking for examples of their work. Oh, can you send pictures, or would you be able to do a mock-up for us? All of those kinds of things.
Yep, Excellent, excellent. Now, we also have a question that actually I can probably answer from my own experience in Nancelin. I might not have said your name correctly, but what she's basically asking is she's saying she's thinking about moving into a smaller space and wondered if there was a list of essentials and how do you take the first steps? What are the process of going from a generational family home into a smaller space? And I can relate to that because what I did is I started downsizing over a period of time from a home to a 1 bedroom to eventually a studio apartment. And as I said, it took me a year, it took me quite a bit before I actually got into my place. So I did this process where I actually, in my apartment, I taped off the area that the van was going to comprise of, right? And then I started building by putting things in there. And I said, okay, first of all, where would the kitchen be? Where would this would be? And then I would get out in my apartment a pile of all the pots and pans I need. And then I designed the cabinets around it. I took my clothes, and this was an interesting one. Everybody with clothes can understand this, especially women. For a month, I took, and every time I wore something, I hung it on this end of my closet. And if I wore it twice, I hung it on this end of my closet. And you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear I found out I only wore 3/4 of my stuff. So then I counted the number of hangers and I designed my closet around that. And so over the years, I have changed out certain things, but not a whole lot. And then it came down to the fact that I had the essentials. I said, well, everything has to have 3 purposes. This pan has to be able to do 3 things. This has to do 3 things. I had this 3-thing rule I got in my head, right? So everything has to be multi-purpose and squeezable and collapsible. And I Googled forever, small, tiny, collapsible, compact. I still do that all the time. And then it came down to the emotions. The things that you didn't need, had no service, and you had to do something with. So I had a small storage unit for a very small period of time. And then one day I found that the storage unit was just keeping me from being free. It wasn't giving me the freedom I want. I threw up the keys, donated it, and walked away. And that's been years since. So it's a process of identifying what you need. I had to do a lot during the first, planning stage to say, what will this be like? What would this be like? And that was a little bit challenging, but it's a mixture of being very process oriented to have a plan. And then the hardest one is when you got to sit down and deal with your emotions. So that's what I would say from the process of it. I'm sure you can share some experiences from what you've had with you dealing with clients that are doing the same thing, Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my internet went out for a second. So I think I got the question. Is it kind of like, how do you downsize, or what do you need to downsize?
Yep.
Yeah, I think everything that you mentioned is what I would recommend. It's like to try and live smaller, and then you live a little bit smaller, and then you live a little bit smaller. We've had clients that are like, we had a big house and we sold it, and now we're living in a studio. So now we know we're ready to go tiny. That's also another thing I would recommend. Or there's a lot of Airbnbs now, tiny house Airbnbs. I would also recommend go stay in a tiny house for a week. Obviously, like, it's going to be different. Traveling and actually living are different, but just any experiments that you can do, go to tiny house shows, stand in tiny houses, go look at converted vans, any of that, and kind of like ask yourself, okay, what do I do from the time that I wake up to the time that I go to bed? How do I use my space? And start from there. Do I spend a lot of time in the kitchen? Is that a really important part to me? Is a bathroom really important? Like, all of the little things, like, really think about minute to minute how you spend your time and where you spend your time. And that would help, like, design a tiny house. And it would also help you limit your stuff, because if you have a corner of your house that you never use, you probably don't need any of the stuff that's in that corner. So I would think about it that way too.
That's good advice. In fact, it reminded me, I did that. I wrote down for a month everything that me and my older cat at the time did. And I took that list to Sportsmobile and said, I need to do all these things. And the one thing I couldn't do was a certain move in my yoga, because I do yoga. And so I had the passenger seat removed and everything pushed up and made the passenger seat an entry so I could do yoga. So yeah, that's a wonderful advice as well. Well, Rebecca, this has been fun. And I think from everybody that joined us, they can see it's also been educational. One of the people asked, how do you get in touch with Rebecca? Go into the chat. Lauren put her information there. If you need to get in touch with me, Lauren will put her email. You can get in touch with me. Lauren, hasn't this been awesome? I mean, I can't thank Rebecca enough because, you know, my passion is helping small businesses succeed while giving them some excitement and entertainment. And I think we've achieved that on such a great level. So you can see a tiny house is not tiny in planning, and every single business has its complications. And I love what Rebecca said. Don't be afraid of it. Just take it on little by little, reach out to people, ask questions, go to the government. I mean, Lauren, I could go on and on. It just was such a great, fun show. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to Rebecca, and I'm going to pass it back to you, Lauren.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Lori.
Lori.
Thank you, Rebecca. It was awesome. I'm like a super fan. So I watch the shows and I'm
you.
like, you know, me and my 4 kids and this dog and husband, we can totally make it work.
You
right?
can.
So I was just looking forward to this show, and the chat was going crazy, Q&As as well. Thank you. It was super informative. Loved hearing your journey. Thank you for sharing.
Thank
Well,
you so
Lauren,
much, Lauren and Lori.
Rebecca and I are going to take off to everybody on the show. You know, Lauren will stay behind. She'll collect any additional questions, any information, any contact information. And Rebecca, thank you again. And to all my frequent flyers and brand new attendees and people who watch the show, thank you for being here. And we will see you next week for another episode of Small Biz Talk. Bye, everybody.
Thank
Hi,
you.
thank you, Rebecca. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Laura. For those of you still on, please check the chat. You're able to see how to connect with Rebecca as well as with Lori. With that, thank you for joining us for another awesome episode of Small Biz Talk, solutions for your small business. We will see you next week, Wednesday at 10 a.m. for another fun show. Take care. Bye.